we have this idea with Entuity monitoring around monitoring what matters. And so we see that come up with the way that we do default thresholds, the way that we're opinionated about which metrics off of a MIB matter, right? To be active by default, right? And how those things behave. And really the point there is to drive out the noise for signal, right? So how do we make sure that your Entuity monitoring is high value and useful, right? And so we do a lot with suppression and those things, right? The other part of that discussion though is so one, we want to cut down on the noise. We want to make sure that the things that are coming out of there are useful and actionable and all those sort of important words. But for want of a change ticket, right, or a deployment ticket for Entuity, right, we often hear from customers that, Entuity didn't catch it because it wasn't in Entuity, right? It didn't get added. And I think that's an easy thing to have happen, and it's a too bad thing, right? And that's really what we're gonna drive through today is that problem of how do we make sure that things are in monitoring that need to be, that they're set up the right way to standards. I think when you have a small enough environment, you can succeed with the business process manual approach, right? So when I set up something new, I always go set up Entuity monitoring. That's my process, right? And I think that as and when I say small environments, it's less about device counts, right? And more about admin counts, right? So how many people are in the environment making changes, right? Whether that's adding new devices, adding new services on those devices, provisioning ports, on and on and on, right? So if you're, one person managing, even a very large network or a state, you can keep up with it. It's your process, right? But I think it gets a lot tougher as that span of control disappears and gets spread across a bunch of other folks, right? And I think we see the same problem with discovery, asset databases, right? In that space, right? Where there's a project, we get it up to date, and then it's, as soon as we're done, it's immediately out of date, right? And so in a lot of cases with an Entuity, kickoff or startup, when we're adding devices, sometimes folks will have, a known device list. We might do a one-time discovery on some known networks, and we go through and decide what matters. And so we've got a good snapshot. And again, if you have a small enough environment, that might be all that, story's done, right? Now you're, kind of steady state and you manage it. There's not a lot of changes. I think the trend in computing over the years has been from these things are so expensive, they don't change very often. It's a 5-10 year buy cycle. And I remember early in my career running into things like, oh, that server's John, right? Like we would give them people names sometimes, right? And I think that virtual machines were a big change to that, right? We had a lot more ephemeral servers, right? Where they were here till I don't need them anymore and I don't care very much. Containerization's pushing that even further where it's, I only need this for a couple of minutes, right? And so making sure that monitoring there becomes bigger problem. The other piece is thinking about the CMDBs and ITSMs is if Entuity knows this, well, then we should be a good member of the community and tell everyone, right? And really what I mean there is functioning as like a source of truth to an ITSM, to a CMDB, right? Or maybe it's as simple as an asset report or an asset dashboard, right? Here's what's in the environment, right? Again, this is going to ultimately come back to what your business needs, right? And where you're at. There isn't one size fits all or the right way, right? There's just some different patterns that I think we've seen work really well in the field with other customers. And so with that, that's kind of what we wanted to dig into today was what are some of those patterns along that maturity path of, what do we want to do next, right? And why, right? So I'll pause for a second and ask Pete and JD, is there anything, I talked for a long time there, but is there anything you guys want to highlight or that I missed maybe?
I think you're absolutely right that there is a tendency to perform maybe an automatic discovery, an auto discovery path or two upfront, and then rather put it on the back burner and forget about it because not a lot has changed within the few weeks that you've been working on the deployment, and then forget that you're not actually keeping up to date automatically. And that's really what you're driving at here. That there is a lot of benefit from implementing automation, even though you don't see the benefit day 2, day 3, day 4.
It's less obvious, right?
Come day 45, then there probably would have been a bit of benefit and a little bit of extra effort up front to keep the automation running. Even if you are discovering and not taking devices under management automatically, at least administrators would then have vision as to what is new, and they can take the decision to move forward and take them under management or not. And it would then, they are empowered to do that.
Pete, you're on mute if you were going to say anything. It looks like you wanted to.
Yeah, I think there's the benefit of that ongoing process, because we've certainly seen cases where customers are going to be blinded by something that did happen. I mean, there's real cases for that. I've seen it historically. I've run into it with customers as well. And it's a matter of understanding what is changing that they don't know about. So even if you've got a really solid onboarding process, so you've sort of got this back-end workflow that says, here's how we add devices, here's how we manage our environment, coupling that with a level of discovery on the back end as a validation point has some significant value, I think.
And validation, in other words, is audit. That there is an audit mechanism for making sure that what you think is the truth actually is the truth.
And that's a story that you can tell if you've got something where you've got a real CMDB environment, third-party product, you've got a CMDB. How do you reflect the reality back to what the CMDB thinks is real? Because reality's got different perspectives. That's why CMDBs are really hard.
Yes, that's a nice way to put it, right? They're really hard. Okay. So I know we talked about maybe walking through some examples of kind of crawl, walk, run and complexity, right? From a kind of the basic, what are some of the features maybe you don't think about with automated discovery, and how to drive that process, what to do after, right? So how do we do the views to drive that? What are some of the benefits? Can we do dynamic views, right? So you guys ready to do that, or do we want to keep talking about kind of the benefits here? How do we want to progress?
I think it's worth at this point discussing how you may want to implement auto discovery. And really, I think that goes hand in hand with how the views are going to be populated. It's very easy to think of them as very different parts of the product and very different processes, but really there's a benefit in thinking of them together. Certainly, if you do all of your discovery up front and have hundreds, if not thousands of devices under management, and then take a step back and think, I wonder how we're going to represent that in views, you've already lost one important opportunity in automating your views. And basically that has to go out the window and you're left with a subset of opportunities. So it's better, certainly with new implementations, to do a bit of upfront thinking and discussion of the pros and cons of whether or not, when you're performing an auto discovery pass, and bear in mind, within Entuity, auto discovery can be broken up into many independent discovery profiles, and they could be focused on different parts of the network. Each one of those has the opportunity of auto-populating what it finds into a nominated view. And by that approach, you can automatically maintain that view representing what you expect it to represent. Maybe it's a sub-office, maybe it's a data center, maybe it's a particular type of technology, but that will keep it up to date. It will put newly discovered devices into that view. Newly discovered is the critical phrase there. If you've already discovered those devices and then you turn the feature on, anything you've already discovered won't go in the view because it's already discovered, it's not new. And so it's important, if you're going to use that capability, you use it up front to make sure that all of your devices get put in the view. Yes, you could go back and manually copy a bunch of devices that are already discovered into the view to make up for the fact that you didn't do it up front. But if you know about it and are well organized, then that's the sort of thing you can benefit from doing up front. Now, the other approach, Pete, do you want to talk about filters?
Yeah, so the traditional approach, I think, just going back to what you mentioned, so it's something that, to be honest, I don't think of often either, but folks don't think of often where they're planning up front. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, but if you have that opportunity, you can actually leverage the auto discovery feature to be able to do that population and then run that on a regular basis to maintain the contents of a view. I think that's a real powerful thing. It does require you to do some thinking up front for that, but if you go back to the traditional approach, then yeah, it's a matter of understanding how you want to group your assets. You know, you've got multiple sites, you've got multiple technologies, you've got different teams that are going to access details, and then leverage the concept of a content filter. So this is a method where, you know, adding in if you've got sites based on IP address range, or if you've got sites that are using really good naming conventions for devices. You know, you can do patterns based on names of devices to say, these are the things that belong in this location. And then, you know, that's just the kind of the asset side of that, right, JD? I mean, it's the population. Those will be automated then. So as you add devices, even if you're doing auto discovery to automatically add devices, those assets are going to be added into, you know, the different site-based views or different technology-based views or combinations thereof.
And just to extend what Peter just said, there are some more options. For example, you could pick certain strings, certain substrings out of a location field to determine this lives in New York, that lives in San Jose. You could look at the system description string and say, this is a Cisco Catalyst, that is this particular type of Palo Alto firewall. So you can perform a lot of dynamic selectivity and thereby minimize the effort of having to maintain these views manually. That's the key here. By implementing appropriate automation, you avoid having to keep up to date potentially many views, and you get the accuracy of it all being done automatically. So you put the effort in and you benefit from getting the accuracy and dependability. You can be pretty sure that all of your Palo Alto firewalls have gone in that view. Everything in Boston has gone in a different view, and all of that type of operation.
Picking at that, just to interject for a second, you know, we've talked about kind of these OR statements, right? Everything in Boston or all your Palo Altos, but this is Entuity we're talking about, right? So we're able to stack all of that filtering to to then say only Palo Alto devices in Boston that have a substring in their host name of prod, right? So we're not only limited to kind of these ORs, right? These are different use cases, but we can tie these together to get either really specific in a large enough organization, right? Or pretty broad, right? And multifunction, because I know depending on the use case, when I'm looking at Entuity, sometimes the technology view is quicker to go, hey, I want to go look at all the firewalls, right? Or sometimes it's quicker to go by a location or whatever else, right? So, the fact that devices can be in multiple views really kind of opens you up to serve many different users kind of with what they need, right?
And the view itself then becomes that basis for your story, because you're going to extend that again to role-based access. So I mean, we've had customers that will set up views that are focused on, well, here's what the NOC should see, but there's a parallel group of those views that might be for an operational sense. But the NOC is going to see not only just the devices that are critical in those areas, but they're also going to filter down the noise to the alerting that is specific to what they need to see.
Right. A NOC might only care about network outages and routing protocol errors, right? Whereas either network operations team, like an engineering team might want some more detail about health, right? Or an app team might care about interface, utilization, right? But there's not I always kind of laughed at the idea of a critical alert for high interface utilization, right? Where you're going to go turn the app off, right? To get the network back under control? Probably not. So is it really critical that becomes sort of a fun two nerds and a pint sort of conversation, which maybe we'll have that someday here. But I think that's all great, guys, right? The views and how that fits together. And then, so basically what we're saying is we can add devices to a view when we first take them under management as a function of the discovery job, right?
Right.
But then additionally, after that first time, we can use filters to do that. So one of the pushbacks we get a lot for people when they hear automated discovery is, but hey, I want to know that I added something, right? I want that to be a conscious decision, right? And so almost the sort of the pain of we might miss stuff is worth it because I want to know. Have you guys encountered anybody who's come up with something interesting to handle the that idea of like, hey, I've added a new device and now I'm going to put it in sort of this new device view, but then the filters will put it, in the right tech and location views?
Well, I think one thing that I've been asked on a few occasions is how to quickly identify what has been taken under management recently. That a user or an administrator really wants to know about the order that devices have been added, starting with the most recent. And in fact, that's a very straightforward thing to address. And when you're looking at a view, by default, when you look at the contents of a view, it's just going to show you everything that's in there. Yes, you could sort it alphabetically by the name of the device and things like that. However, it's very easy to add another column to a view content dashboard, and the column would be the managed since column. That's the date on which it was taken under management.
Right.
Once you've added that column, you can sort by it, and you can sort with the most recent dates at the top. And therefore, you've got a chronologic list starting with the most recent additions right at the top. Really handy to know that that's in there. And it's a couple of clicks on the configuration of the content dashboard. Really easy to implement. And it gives you that visibility that you wouldn't otherwise think you've got.
Great. Yeah, no, so just really to be able to cross-reference, right? When did these things come in? That's awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah, you could certainly do reports around this as well, and you could build dashboards that are filtering just on here's everything that happened in the last week. There's facilities to be able to even narrow the scope down, but just that initial look, I think, is certainly got value.
So really, let me just translate down to the simplest bucket, right? It shouldn't be a concern, right? Entuity is capable of communicating. We can set this. You can set this up so that you're not adding devices and you have no idea that they're there or they exist or anything else, right? We can take some steps to fix that, basically, which is great. So what's next, right? So I've got them in views, right? Can I do anything else with that besides drive my views off of discovery and all that, right? I've got a ton of data in Entuity. Might be using some of the dashboards as a asset view, right? What do we see people do kind of next, right? Once they're there, right? I've got good discovery rules. I've got good views to put them in the right spots. What do I want to go tackle next on that maturity piece, right? I'm ready for the next one.
One thing I've seen is organizations that are very concerned to minimize vulnerabilities, particularly in the area of devices and their operating systems being adequately up to date. Now, we all know that some devices, or most devices, will reach a certain age, at which point the manufacturers no longer support them. At that point, the only way to avoid further vulnerabilities with those is to replace the devices. As far as the operating systems on the devices go, the manufacturers will usually maintain support for operating systems and patches, upgrades for several years. But again, there will come a point when support is withdrawn and you're never going to see an upgraded operating system for an old switch, let's say. So keeping an eye on the vintage of the equipment and its operating systems, and looking for those that have fallen out of support. Once you start then breaking that down by view, which can correspond to the region or office, and different responsibilities within the organization, different teams, then you can start focusing in on which teams have got the biggest headache as far as making sure that they refresh the devices and make sure their patching is up to date.
Jordan, you're talking about, once you've got devices onboarded, once you're actually grouping them in some semblance of a business group, what do you do next? Right.
Right. I have a mature Entuity implementation. It's humming along. I get these devices under management. I get them in the right views. Right. I just got some free time in my schedule after all that. What else can I do? What are we seeing some of our larger and larger environments do to make this easier? Right. What's that next maturity milestone to drive towards?
Well, I'll go back to noise reduction. You brought it up at the beginning of the session, but it's, understanding the story that devices are telling me. And again, we do noise reduction across the board to mitigate things that make what you see actionable. But it is that case of I've got a group of devices in a view that are going to tell me a story about, I just have network outages here. I have an availability issue. I've got maybe high CPU and memory on servers, or if I've got component failures for hardware monitoring devices, but things that are critical. I mean, I see that as sort of a next step.
I think those are really good steps.
Yeah.
I was trying to lead the horse to say, I've got all this great data. Couldn't I send it to ServiceNow or my ITSM CMDB to say, hey, Mr. Definitive Data Source, I know the truth. Let me tell you about the network, right? Here's the versions, here's the things, right? That's something, I think about how those projects often are immediately out of date, right? And so, Entuity doing live discovery and live monitoring, we're going to have, host names, IP addresses, all this sort of rich, real data from the network, right? Entuity has a bunch of topology data of how things fit together, right? From a from the topology maps, right? So, what's the right path to start thinking about that stuff, right?
Well, some of that depends upon, do you have an established CMDB in your environment, or is Entuity the reality of the CMDB, right? Because
Whoa,
in
wait,
Entuity,
say more.
well,
Entuity
Entuity
is the CMDB. I'm
in,
a product guy. I'm gonna put that on the website. Let's go.
there you go. No, but Entuity is reality in terms of what's being monitored, right? And then done correctly, Entuity is the reality of what your infrastructure is, what's out there. Now, again, you're not picking up stuff that's sitting on a back shelf in a closet, in a spare closet, that type of thing. But in terms of what you're running, that is a referenceable CMDB. And that's really the value where you do have a large, at least in my opinion, where you do have a large CMDB effort organizationally, and you'll see this with the large companies. You feed Entuity into that CMDB and said, here's what's real on the network. What do you think? And you can do reconciliation across those assets. But all the asset data is going to be there.
Not only have you got the knowledge of what chassis you've got, but you've also got the knowledge of what subcomponents, the
Right.
modules, the field replaceable units, the FRUs. By aggregating all of that knowledge, either across the entire organization or at least region by region what FRUs you have. And therefore, if you are going to take responsibility for stocking replacement FRUs, replacement power supplies, replacement line cards, whatever they may be, you know how many you've got deployed of what model and what version, so that you can take logical decisions to make appropriate stocking decisions. When have you got too many of this model power supply? Maybe because you're phasing out that type of switch and you no longer need them. Maybe you can offload those excessive inventory. Maybe you're short of this new generation of device, the line cards that go in it. You only have a couple of them, and really, considering how many you've deployed, you really ought to have a few more in stock.
So really
that sort
what
of
we're saying
knowledge
here is, in the right use case, right? Whether it's focused to a network team or a small enough team or just without other tools, right? There's a real opportunity to leverage the data that's coming out of Entuity Auto Discovery and then feeding into the managed device views, right? I know, Pete, I've seen some of the views you've built, right, around kind of asset management and understanding what's out there, and we've done some work around adding, vendor warranty data, park place support data, right, into those views, right? So getting beyond sort of the NPM data points and into kind of an asset management, database, right, as it were. So I think that's really exciting to think about, right? Being able to use Entuity there if you don't have something, right? Because I think in a lot of cases, something's better than nothing, right? When it comes to what's in my network or what's in my environment, right? So even just that idea, I think, is revolutionary to say. We had a handful of people say not really today, right? To the question of, do you have, are you doing anything today? If you have Entuity deployed, maybe think about how you are really doing that today, right? With Entuity,
Right.
you just aren't. You're not thinking to go to the toolbox for that, right? So, what about extensibility, right? So, if I have, let's say, I have a mature asset lifecycle process, and I have a good idea. Maybe I have a internal service provider model or a telco model, right? Of I only support these things that are enumerated, right? How might I extend that into Entuity from that side, right? So kind of Entuity coming into the mature environment. Is there a way that we can help there?
So you're saying, Entuity understands things about the asset, we understand things about the circuit, but we're actually bringing in more of kind of a business construct information, whether it's contract information or service provider information, things like that.
Yeah, it could be entitlement, it could be contact,
Sure.
right? Like,
Yep.
Things that might exist in a CMDB to say, hey, that's great that you found 200 devices on that subnet. Only 3 of them are under contract for service, and furthermore, only these 6 ports matter, right?
Right.
Kind of the, there we're getting into the CMDB dog wagging the Entuity tail. Have you guys done anything with that?
But JD, you've done some work as far as API integration with things that have that data.
Absolutely.
Ways, right?
If you've got an external source of data, particularly if it has a REST API that is up to date, and that can then be pulled in and cross-referenced by things like serial numbers. Another related aspect that I've seen customers take advantage of is our ability to add custom attributes onto,
right,
for example, devices, and put additional information, not polled, but manually entered information that, for example, when you're dealing with servers, it could be down at the operating system level, identify who is responsible for it. If at 3 o'clock in the morning there's a problem and the operations team are alerted, what do you do? Who's responsible? Do they want a 3 o'clock a.m. phone call? Do they prefer to wait until 8 a.m. when they get into the office? Who's meant to do what about it? Should you try and restart it?
Now we're really getting
type of
into
information.
Using that third-party data source, right? ITSM or whatever, to drive. We could drive things like view membership, right? To say, if it's a critical device, then it goes here, and maybe that drives some of the knock behavior, right? So I think there's a lot of
That's true. Yeah.
really strong use cases there to
I think
and to support Entuity being the member of this ecosystem, right? I oftentimes will talk about the fact that we think Entuity is great, right? It does a lot of things really well, but it's by no means the only operations tool you're going to own, right? You'll at least need a ticketing system, right? But there's other tools, right? So how do we pull that data in and make it a richer experience for Entuity, and how do we send data to them? And hold on, integrations is probably a whole Tech Talk series on its own. So I won't derail us too hard, but I'm a little passionate there.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I'm just going to extend what JD was talking about. We talk about devices and extending information that you might have in other sources and leverage that within Entuity. So Entuity is extensible there, but I've also seen it in terms of circuits. So you talk about vendor supplied circuits from a data perspective. So you've got these interfaces that are WAN circuits feeding all different things. I've actually had cases where customers will want to look at who's my circuit provider, what's their email address, what's my contract number for that internet circuit. And you can extend not only device information, you can extend port information in Entuity as well. So
So when the alert comes in, the poor soul working in the NOC, right? They've got it right there that this is an AT&T
right.
circuit with this ID, and maybe even here's the 800 number to call it in.
Well, I've had cases where we see this circuit go down. If it's down for X period of time, there's an email associated with that circuit that actually then sends an email to that AT&T in bucket. So you can open up tickets with your service provider directly. I've also had customers that will take this into the reporting standpoint, where they're looking at per charge availability over a period of a month or 2 months or 3 months, where if it's down for more than X period of time, I'm only going to pay you this much. And they've done some automated reporting that sort of captures that as well. But the idea is Entuity is extensible in whether it's a device perspective and leverage that data, or it's a port perspective, leverage that data.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting topic. And it's such a simple one, right? I think this was one of those ones that there's a lot of time, and I think JD, you said it early, right? Takes a little bit of time on the front end to plan these things out, to think about how we want to approach device management and integration and where our points, right? And this is kind of a ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, right? Because, you know, the thing to remember here is ultimately this is about making sure that we have devices in management, that they are handled properly, right? So that we can monitor what matters, right? Is what we're trying to drive at here. So, you know, I think it's been exciting. I think Steve had a question around kind of development priorities. I have to double check on where that is. I know we've had some FCRs and we're always trying to do more work around kind of the front end and how it works. So Steve, I'll have to take a rain check on that and come back as far as the view memberships, how you might do that with custom attributes, unless either the two smarter guys than me are going to say there's a neat trick to do it today.
If you want to build views and modify their contents based upon custom attributes, my best recommendation for that would be to consider driving the view population through our REST API. And then maybe an external script can be consulting additional information such as custom attributes or third-party information from outside, and making decisions on which devices go in the view. All of that can be driven through the REST API. Anything you can do through the user interface, you can do through the REST API, and it's designed for automation purposes.
That's a good call out for the now.
Yeah, the API is actually a really good topic anyway, because depending upon the number of views that you're building, you can use the API to build these too. So in the case where you're doing 50, 100, 150, 200 views, rather than doing them all via the web interface, which works just fine, it can be much quicker to do it via the API. So there's ways to do that too.
I've worked with a customer that had 1,200 physical locations around the globe, and the details of each one, because they wanted a separate view for each one, including the street address, so that it can be plotted on a Google map in our map dashboard. All of that was scripted so that it just took it from a file and built the views and populated them according to their naming strategy.
Yep.
No, I think I hope we've given everybody a lot to, you know, think about with the topic today. I think this has been a really helpful deep dive on all of this, right? And giving people ideas of what to do, or maybe covered enough of this to make people go look again, right? And I'm going to launch a poll here around just really the basic question, right? What topic do we want to see this year, right, in a future Tech Talk? And I will do a little bit of a plug for the dev team. Version 22 is coming soon. Keep your eyes peeled. So we'll probably do a Tech Talk. Probably our next one will be around that, around the V22 release, and kind of reviewing some of the highlight features there, and what's coming. And so keep an eye out for that. We are targeting April as kind of the release date for V22. So as soon as we have a date locked in, we're going to send a notification out to all the users of features and you know, specific targeted dates. But really an exciting time of the year. John Regan, is there anything else I was supposed to plug and that I've forgot terribly?
No, nothing else on my end. We'll follow up after this presentation with a link to a recording, so feel free to share with other members of your teams that may not have been able to attend this call. And if there's anything else, we'll include it in that email.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and to JD and Pete, thanks. This was sometimes these are easier when you've got a nice demo to talk through, right? So I appreciate the free form discussion and really trying to have that discussion of how's best to do this, right? A lot of the almost philosophical, right? So I think hopefully this was helpful for everybody else as they're trying to do these things. And I already see somebody put integration on the word cloud, so that's exciting. We could do a whole integration series. I like it. But I think with that, if you guys want to say anything else, I think we can kind of wrap up and give a couple minutes back at either the end of the day or lunchtime or mid-morning. The calendar's all over the place. So, but thank you so much, everybody.